Estou passando nesse podcast para dividir uma informação que fez toda a diferença na minha vida. Quer fazer pós-graduação, mas tá impossível correr de um lugar para o outro?
Pois é, ainda mais com o trânsito.
Então você precisa conhecer a educação à distância do Senac. Sabia que é nota máxima no MEC? E tem diversos cursos de pós-graduação para te levar ainda mais longe. 100% online, sem necessidade de TCC e com acesso direto a todos os professores.
Ah, saber isso fez diferença sim.
Inscreva-se já na pós-graduação EAD. Quer saber? Senac EAD.
Você que está ouvindo esse podcast vive no trânsito entre uma reunião e outra. Só um carro poderá te dar a segurança que precisa. O Volkswagen Taos. O SUVW com nota máxima em segurança e com sensor de ponto cego, assistente de faixa e muitos outros poderes. Taos, um carro com superpoderes.
Hello and welcome to the Byline podcast from the Byline Times. It's what the papers don't say, what radio doesn't report and what telly doesn't tell you. My name is Adrian Goldberg. This time, Windrush, the scandal continues. I'm sure that most listeners to this podcast will know that Windrush was the name of a ship carrying hundreds of migrants from the Caribbean to the UK in 1948, which docked at Tilbury in Essex. It came to symbolise a generation of people from an outpost of Britain's former empire who came to help what they were told was the mother country rebuild in the years after World War II. So far, so good. But under a crackdown provoked by Theresa May's hostile environment policy when she was Home Secretary, hundreds of people from the Windrush generation who had lived virtually all their lives in this country found themselves denied legal rights and benefits they had worked for. Others lost their homes and jobs. Dozens were deported to countries where they might only have lived for months before having spent the bulk of their lives in Britain. Their children were affected too. It was an outrage, and an investigation by Inspector of Constabulary Wendy Williams in 2020 made 30 recommendations to remedy the situation. These were accepted by the then Home Secretary, Priti Patel, but her successor, Suella Braverman, then rode back on 3 of the recommendations. The government has now lost a court case and been told to reinstate 2 of those recommendations. We're going to hear shortly from Timi Okwa, CEO of the Black Equity Organisation, which helped bring the court case, and Bishop Desmond Jadu from the Windrush National Organisation. First, though, Glenda Caesar, who I spoke to a while back on this podcast. She was directly affected by the Windrush scandal.
I came to this country when I was 3 months old as a baby in the early 60s. My father had come over to sort of like pave the way for my mum and my other siblings to come over. But I was the first of 4 to come over as the baby. So I practically lived here all my life, 3 months old, knew nothing else. I became a mother at a very early age, at the age of 16. And by 18, I was a mother of 3. So my main concern was just to build a home for my children, carry on with my education and get to where I wanted to. I was always encouraged by my parents to become a civil servant. And Mommy had strong beliefs in the motherland, as they called it, when they came over. And she and Daddy always encouraged us to get a government job. Either you work for the police, the post office, or the NHS. So it's something that was stuck in my head. But my interest was to become a typist. And obviously I excelled in administration. Once my children were at school, took on the job for the NHS in administration, got to very high profile positions within the mental health administration. So I had another baby at the age of 28. So that's my 4 children. But once I had got into my positions, my children were growing up and they were able to form for themselves or form their own families. I decided I wanted to retire. But it's not as easy as that, just to leave a full-time position and just say, oh, I'm going to stay at home. So I acquired a part-time position as a GP practice administrator, not too far from my home. I was really happy. The hours were good and it was walking distance. But I got interviewed by an interim manager who was quite happy with me. At the time, she did ask me for a passport. I thought, oh, okay, I haven't got a British passport because I couldn't afford to go on holiday when you're raising children at that age. But I had acquired a Dominican passport. And the reason for that is that my mother passed away in 1998. And that's when I really found out I wasn't British. Because all along I thought, well, I'm British. Everything was working okay for me to benefit everything else and being able to get jobs. But it didn't really bother me because I wasn't even interested in going on holiday. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll just apply for a Dominican passport. But they had told me that they needed my birth certificate. So my sisters had to go over to Dominica. Unfortunately, my mum passed away in Dominica. So they acquired my birth certificate and brought it back. And I thought it was going to be a simple process. I could just get a passport. No, it wasn't like that. I said, okay, I'll leave it. Still got into my job, got this part-time position. And it was there that the manager who had taken over had said that he needed to see my British passport. I explained to him, I haven't got it, but I've got over 20 years service with NHS administration. No, he was not happy at all. He persisted. He contacted the NHS lawyers. They came back. I was put in this category as I wasn't meant to be in this country. And then I got terminated. Gross misconduct for not having the right to work or live in this country.
Just so I'm clear on that, Glenda, then, you lost your job, even though you'd been a really hard-working member of staff and you'd got an excellent CV. You lost your job because under the rules that applied at the time, you were declared not to be British and not to have the right to work here, even though you'd lived here from the age of 3 months old.
There you go. At the age of 50, you're telling me that I don't belong in a country which I gave birth to children in this country. And I worked hard. I worked within the trust, implemented systems trust-wide, so I gave my all because that's what I was brought up. This is your home.
How did that feel at that time, Glenda?
It wasn't until I went to go and say, okay, let me go claim benefits. That's when I really found, oh my God, I don't belong. I really don't belong. I was like, but hold on, you're stealing from me. This is my investment. I paid my national insurance contribution so I could come back for it. And they were like, no, sorry, you can't. And then it sort of like daunted on me. And I was like, well, what do I do now? But when you're a single mother, you find ways for you to provide. My mother, God bless her, my father was a tailor, my mother was a machinist. So they've always showed us how to provide. So I would do the odd event decorating for family members, undercut myself, not charge a lot, just for me to have some kind of funds coming in. I've got male children who wear trainers once or twice and they're no good, but I found use of them. I'd clean them up, sanitize them and sell them on eBay, just so I had some kind of funds coming to support myself. My children were very good. They also provided for me financially. And I've got a daughter who's deaf. So she's on benefits. She's got my learning difficulties, but she provided for me as well. So I had a strong support system around me, I must admit. And, my other family members, just to keep my head above water. But when it started to affect my youngest, who was born in 1988, and he was refused a passport, that's when it all daunted on me. And I thought, oh my God, I've put him in a position where he shouldn't have been.
So this is your son who, like all of your children, was British born, but who was then told that he too wasn't considered British.
Yeah, was not even allowed. He became depressed. I became depressed. He wouldn't speak to me. He would lock himself in his room. I obviously had to apply for some kind of ID for him. So I got him a Dominican passport as well, which now I carry on. And he had taken a 2-week holiday to the Dominican Republic. And on his way back in, he phoned me and he said, Mum, they're going to deport me. I said, to where? Where are they going to deport you? You're born here. He said, Mum, I don't know. They said that, I haven't got a stamp on my passport. I was like, oh my God, I'm frantic now because I can't do anything because I've been classed as illegal as well. And about 2 to 3 hours later, he came through the door and he showed me in the passport they'd given him 2 months to regulate his status, or they were going to deport him. And I was like, well, where are you going to deport him to? This is his country. He had his birth certificate, he had his driving license with him, but that still wasn't good enough. And he became more and more depressed, and it made me become depressed, And like I said, I contemplated suicide. I thought if I go, perhaps things would get easier for him. But since 2009, I had been unemployed. I think this happened to him in 2017. And then in 2018, in the middle of me doing an events job, I got a call where someone said, oh, there's people on the telly going through what you're going through. And I said, really? She said, yes, I've been contacted. Would you tell your story? I said, of course. By that time, I had accumulated, papers, everything I could find, anything I could find to prove that I was meant to be in this country. And once they had filmed me, the media had got in contact with me. I had been on the television. The Home Office then contacted me. But bearing in mind, within that time, I had tried to regulate mine and my son's status. I had paid for British status letters, which cost us £100 each, indefinite leave to remain, which cost me nearly £400 each. But they still kept the funds, but sent refusal letters. They were adamant that they wanted something on my father. It would be my father one year, it'd be my mother the next year. And every time I got something, it would be like, no. But they could find nothing on my dad, even though he was a homeowner in this country and he worked as well. But they could find nothing. So that really affected us. But once the media got hold of it and the Home Office had contacted me, I was in shock. I was like, oh my God, they're calling me. And 7 days later, I became a British citizen. I was like, okay.
I just wonder how it makes you feel. And you talked about at some point considering taking your own life. This is your country. It's every bit as much your country as it is my country. You've worked hard, you've paid into the system, and yet for many years telling you that you weren't British. How do you reflect on that, Glenda?
I was really disappointed. I felt as if my mum had rejected me and just thrown me to one side. I don't need you no more. I don't want to talk to you anymore. And that's how it made me feel, because I'm proud to be British. I'm from Hackney. I tell everyone I'm Hackney. I'm proud. And my children are as well. So for successive governments to put these legislations in place, it made me feel horrible. I just lost all trust. I did everything what my mum and my dad came to this country to do, and they encouraged us to do. And I lost all faith and hope. I really did.
So that's Glenda Caesar's story. And Desmond Jaddo, I know that Glenda is a member of your organisation, the Windrush National Organisation. Very moving story and very typical as well of the victims and survivors of Windrush. I want to talk about this legal judgment now, because there were 30 recommendations made by Wendy Williams. Suella Braverman attempted to U-turn on 3 of them. A judge has now said that actually she was wrong to do so in 2 of those cases. But there's one recommendation that Suella Braverman was apparently right to U-turn on. You're not happy about that. Tell me more.
I'm not, no. Recommendation 3 is something that the Windrush National Organisation was working on with the consultants that the Home Office had employed. And we actually developed the program to deliver a truth and reconciliation type event. Now, the Windrush National Organisation, Adrian, is the only organisation that's going around the country actually talking to victims in terms of the engagement meetings we have and gathering their experiences. And we've been doing that since 2018. And one of the things we found is, and just for the record, case study number 1 in the Wendy Williams review, a lady called Gloria from Birmingham, she's actually one of my cases. And we've been on the journey with her for 5 years. And we've seen the impact that it's had on her life. And one of the important things is we saw with recommendation 3, how on earth are you going to tackle these issues when you don't even understand them? And the human element of that impact must be seen. The other thing as well is the discrimination that people face, because in many of these organizations, such as the Caesars mentioned, when managers came in or when people were stupid, they would ask the black staff only for their passports. They never asked the white staff for their passports. And remember as well, in your opening, and that's how it's been reported, they weren't migrants who came on the ship in 1948. They were British subjects. They were told at birth that they're British. I even hear MPs saying this country benefited from migration. No, you didn't. You benefited from colonialism. All of that's been forgotten. And today we're even asking this question, what is it to be British? And if you're white, you're considered to be British. People don't ask you where you're coming from. There's the discrimination. And the thing is, the checks and balances that should have been in place weren't there to monitor that people making mistakes.
But the key recommendation that you do want implemented is one about reconciliation, then, that you believe there should be a series of reconciliation meetings, gatherings around the country. What would they do and who would they involve?
Create that greater understanding. I mean, the Windrush scandal actually commenced on the 21st of June, actually, 1948, when 10 Labour MPs tabled a motion for the Empire Windrush to be turned out of Tilbury and for them to be sent to Ghana to pick peanuts. But that highlighted the major scandal that we were not welcomed here to what was considered to be our own country. And it's for government finally to understand the impact that their policies have upon people of colour, but more importantly, upon their own British subjects. I mean, the King in Jamaica, for example, although there's talks of a republic, King Charles is the head of state. People seem to forget that. And the importance of this reconciliation event is to understand not just the impact it's had on people's lives who got caught up in it, such as Glenda, others such as Gloria. Also, as well, Adrian, the most important thing that we've got to remember with this is that it has raked up some horrifying memories of no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. Adrian, you're from Birmingham. The pubs on Birchfield Road, when they went in there for a drink, they were told, get out, and they were called the N-word, for example. You know, it rakes up all those memories that people have, people being de-skilled, people came here as teachers, told that your qualifications don't work in this country, go and sweep a factory floor. But the contribution of the Windrush generation as well has not been appreciated. And we need to get it out in the open so we can resolve this. One other thing as well, Adrian, as Bishop, you must remember, one of the most hurtful things was faith was the cornerstone of the Windrush generation back in the Caribbean, particularly. What happened was, just imagine you arrive in this country and you're told, please don't come back next Sunday because your presence is upsetting the congregation. There are levels of control and discrimination that we have been subjected to for far too long, and this now needs to be out in the open and mechanisms put in place to deal with it. But the worst part of it is when I read in that court judgment that the cross-government working group, they actually recommended that recommendation 3 be dropped. And that for me was horrific because those folks on that cross-government working group have never really spoken to Windrush victims the way in which we do at the Windrush National Organisation.
Timmy, from the Black Equity Organisation, you were one of the organisations that brought this legal case to the High Court. As you can hear there, Desmond, understandably very passionate about the question of reconciliation meetings, which the High Court said Suella Braverman was right to reject. But the question of greater powers for the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders, the commitment to establish a migrant commissioner, these were recommendations that the High Court said Suella Braverman was wrong to reject. So a significant victory, even if the one aspect that Desmond is most passionate about continues to be knocked back.
Yeah, and it is a significant achievement. We're a fairly new organisation. We were set up 2 years ago. One of the key things we wanted to do was strategic litigation. And when the Windrush case came up, I think around January 2023, was in relation to when Suella Braverman pulled back, abandoned those 3 recommendations. We then decided that we would write to the Home Secretary at that time to say, why has this happened? We put in place a petition. We had about 50,000 people sign up to it. That's how important it was, and it remains to the Black community. And then we took that petition to Number 10 with Professor Patrick Vernon as well. And so we are very pleased that, number one, this is the reason why an organisation like BEO has been set up, is to do these kind of cases. Because if we're going to dismantle structural racism, sometimes it will need to be using the law to do that. And the judge found that the decision to abandon recommendation 9 and 10 breached the public sector equality duty. And in making this finding, the judge considered evidence from Wendy Williams, who confirmed that the government had not consulted her about its intention not to implement the recommendations, and from David Neal, the former ICIBI, who confirmed that in various meetings, Home Office officials had confirmed that recommendation 10 would be implemented, but then later Suella Braverman backtracked on this. So the fact that we've been able to achieve those 2, I think would be of benefit, not just to the Windrush community, but to others as well. And I think importantly, what it says in the broad perspective is that we can use the law to hold the government to account, that the voices of the Black Windrush community is not going to be swept under the carpet. And I've heard what Bishop Desmond has said, and lots of those people that were impacted by the Windrush scandal were disappointed that they had not been consulted about abandoning the reconciliation events. There'd been a series of these outreach and engagement events, which was what the working group said was actually, in a way, the replacement for the reconciliation events. And we've seen how this happens in Rwanda and South Africa. Reconciliation events are much more important than just, let's just have an engagement activity. It's hearing directly from those that have been impacted by this harm to make policy decisions, not hearing directly those stories. You mentioned Glenda Caesar's story about when she worked for the NHS for many years and then she was bounced out. And if you don't hear directly from those people, then how do you make sure that it doesn't happen again? So whilst we're very pleased that 9 and 10 recommendations have been upheld, we will still be holding the government to account, the next government, to ensure that they reconsider the reconciliation events, because I think the impact that it would have in terms of removing the trauma from the Windrush generation and their descendants is so impactful that you can't say because you've done a series of outreach and engagement events, then that's been done. It still is needed, I think.
Yeah, I think people who are not familiar with these processes might struggle to understand, Timmy, the difference between an outreach meeting and a reconciliation meeting. So just talk me through what the difference would be then if you had a reconciliation meeting rather than simply Home Office officials going out and meeting members of the community affected.
Yeah, I think the difference would be for me, and I referenced Rwanda and South Africa. I went to a Grenfell event where they were hearing directly from the people that had been survivors and also their families. Just hearing directly from those people about their experience of how it had impacted them. Longer term, it'd been a few years afterwards, and they were still saying, look, I am still struggling with what happened. Means that for the people that were in the room, there were people in power in the room, there were just normal people like myself in the room, means that you then are able to walk in their shoes. Because how else can I know what impact my decision has had on you if I don't hear directly in terms of the trauma, the long-term impact it's had on you, not just on you, but your descendants. There are Windrush generation descendants who struggled when they were applying for university to say that they were British. So it's not just the Windrush generation, it's even longer than that. And I think when you're in the room to say, I'm not talking, I'm just going to hear directly from you. The Grenfell example that I gave you, this person spoke for at least an hour, talking about their journey, what it's been, means that I walked away from that event thinking, right, it's different from when you read it in the paper. It was really impactful and made me know, wow, that was a really terrible thing and it should not happen again.
Yeah, I guess it's a different emphasis, isn't it, Desmond? If you have outreach meetings, that feels like a top-down process. If you have reconciliation meetings, if you are the people with power, in this case, the Home Office, you're having to assume a position of humility and listen to the other side, put the people who've been victims in this process, as it were, on top, and they're telling you how it was for them, and you, as the Home Office, have to then say, yeah, okay, I hear this, I have to take this on board. It's a shift in emphasis and a shift in power.
The thing was, I know a little bit more about it because we were a part of trying to organize the thing. And you're right, it was to have a panel, very similar to what Kim is mentioning. We probably would have gone in initially and found about 8 to 10 people per region, probably 8 reconciliation meetings across the country, bring them into a public hearing space if they so desired, or privately, gather the evidence. But you're right, listening, just probing them slightly, gather those experiences, report back those experiences with an action plan. Now, Adrian, we've got people, for example, who, as a result of the SUS laws today, can't get a British passport. And they got caught up in the scandal, for example. We've got people who got done, I mean, I like this one, shouldn't be advertising, riding around, joyriding a Ford Capri back in 1972. But, hey, they can't get a British passport today either. But their white counterparts that they were in the Ford Capri with, they're fine. The issue is understanding the dynamics and the impact it had and how hurtful it was. Because many people came here. If we look at Gloria, who is case study number 1, for example, and even Glenda, they came here when In Gloria's case, St. Kitts. In Glenda's case, Dominica. They were British colonies. So then to get told you are not British, you have no right to be here, you bought your house, you own your house, you're married, you've got children, you've got grandchildren, and you are liable to be removed from this country. And their world falling apart. We've got one lady where her hair fell out, for example. We've got one lady's husband who ended up with stage 4 prostate cancer, and he died before his wife got compensation. The point is the impact on the wider family and how it tore the heart out of the family. And finally, to understand that this country, the successive governments must be held to account. And I say successive governments because the 2007 Immigration and Borders Bill was actually brought in by a Birmingham MP, Liam Byrne, when he was immigration minister, and he was quite proud of it. And when Theresa May and David Cameron saw it in 2010, they said, oh, we'll have a bit of this. And they cranked it up. But they cranked it up in such a way where there was no common sense. So this will happen again unless particularly people who work at the Home Office and the wider society understand the journey, but also understand the dynamics and the impact that these aggressive policies have had. That's why we've just done our 12-point election plan. One of the things we're asking for is a cessation of the hostile environment and have an across-the-board compliant environment, for example. As a part of our national strategy, we will deliver recommendation through ourselves as an organisation. We will find the money, Adrian, and we will deliver it. We do have the ears now to listen to what we've got to say. And that's the most important thing. And I'll tell you today, we are going to deliver recommendation 3, irrespective of what the Home Office and government want.
Timmy, you know, something that Desmond said really struck a chord with me, and he was quite right to correct my opening because I referred to migrants. But of course, in 1948, when the Windrush docked at Tilbury, Britain had an empire, and people living in parts of the empire were told they were British. So when they came to the UK, as Desmond says, they were not migrants. They were moving to a different part of what they had been told was their country.
Yes, and I think that was one of the most hurtful, traumatic elements of that, because it's like I'm at home, I'm in my house, I've been in my house for 30 years, and then as it has with the case with some of the Windrush survivors, I just need to go back home to Jamaica. I need to go and see my mum who's unwell. And it's at that point you realise, actually, you're not considered to be British, and you can't get a British passport. And that citizenship, when the original Windrush generation came to the UK, it was positioned as a positive thing. You're coming to your home country. And then you find out actually you're not seen to be a citizen. And you've put so much energy into the NHS, you've put so much energy into the National Rail, you've put so much energy into building the UK. And then you find out actually, I am not. So you lose your pension, you lose your job, you lose your benefits. And there's still so many people now who, even with the Windrush compensation scheme, because it's taken so long and it's such a long and painful process to get those cases heard, a lot of people have actually died without those cases being finalized. So for me, the trauma around it has been really difficult. And I'm really glad to hear Bishop Desmond saying that the reconciliation events are something that should be done, and we will welcome an opportunity to be partner with you on that, because I think hearing directly from the Windrush generation about those stories means that that trauma can then be lifted up and be moved on. We can then be more positive about our spaces living in the United Kingdom.
Timmy, great to speak to you. Thank you for your time. Thanks also to Bishop Desmond Jaddo. I'm Adrian Goldberg. This has been the Byline podcast, produced in Birmingham by We Bring Audio for Byline Audio by me and Harvey White. Just to remind you as well, if you want to support the work of this podcast, the best way you can do that is to take out a subscription to the Byline Times. It's our brilliant monthly newspaper, or news periodical, as we call it these days. So if you head over to bylinetimes.com, that's our website, that'll give you details of how you can take out a subscription. And the monthly magazine includes the best of our online articles and content that you can't read anywhere else. So do head over to bylinetimes.com if you can and take out a subscription. And before we go as well, just a reminder that we have got some fantastic audio offerings now, head over to bylineaudio.com. That's bylineaudio.com, and you can find out more about the fantastic listening that is now available from Byline Times. I'll see you again very soon, but for now, thank you and take care. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Byline.